A homeless boy, barely 10 years old, saw three men in a dark alley sharpening their knives and checking their pistols. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight to the massive Hell's Angel biker sitting on a chrome-heavy chopper outside the gas station and whispered, "It's a setup, run. They're waiting for you around the corner." What happened next was shocking. But to understand how a kid with no shoes and a dirt-streaked face ended up saving the life of one of the most feared men in the state, let's go back to the beginning. Before we dive into this incredible journey of loyalty and survival, I want to know who is riding with us today. Comment down below and let us know which city or country you're watching from. We're building a brotherhood here, and you're part of this family now. The boy's name was Leo. Leo didn't have a last name that anyone bothered to use, and he didn't have a home with a white picket fence. His home was a reinforced cardboard structure tucked behind an industrial dumpster on the outskirts of Las Vegas. It was a place where the neon lights of the Strip faded into the harsh, unforgiving heat of the Mojave Desert. Leo was a shadow. He was the kind of kid people walked past without looking at, the kind of person who learned to be silent because silence meant safety. His mother had passed away 2 years prior, leaving him with nothing but a tattered blanket and the instinct to stay out of the way of the sharks, the predators who prowled the low-rent districts looking for anyone weaker than them. On the other side of this story was Jax, Ironhead Miller. Jax was a legend in the Hells Angels circuit. He wasn't just a biker. He was a mountain of a man with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world and decided it wasn't worth the hype. Jax was the sergeant-at-arms for his chapter, the man responsible for security, for the business of the club, and for ensuring that no one disrespected the patch. He moved with an authority that made the air feel heavy. When Jax rode, the ground trembled. But even legends have enemies. A rival group, a nasty outfit calling themselves the Vultures, had been trying to move into Jax's territory. They weren't bikers. They were thugs in suits and street clothes, looking to control the flow of goods through the desert. They didn't care about the code of the road. They only cared about the green in their pockets. And they knew that if they took out Jax, the chapter would crumble from the inside out. The morning of the incident started like any other for Leo. He had spent the night shivering under his blanket, waiting for the sun to provide the warmth the desert took away at night. He had managed to find half a sandwich in a bin behind a nearby deli, and he was sitting in the alleyway eating it slowly, trying to make every bite last. That was when he heard the voices. 3 men. They were tucked behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. Leo stayed small, blending into the shadows of the dumpster. He was used to hiding, but something about the way these men spoke made the hair on his arms stand up. "He'll be here at 10, the one in the center said. He was a wiry man with a twitchy eye and a scar running through his eyebrow. He always stops at the Sinclair for gas before heading out to the clubhouse. We take him when he's fueling. He's a big target, but he can't reach his piece while he's holding the pump." "What about the kid?" another asked, pointing toward the end of the alley. Leo held his breath. He felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "The brat? Ignore him," the leader sneered. "He's a ghost. He won't say a word. If he does, we'll handle him after we finish Miller. Just make sure the van is idling. We drop him, grab the vest, and we're gone before the sirens start." They checked their weapons. The metallic click-clack of a slide racking around into a chamber echoed through the narrow space. To them, Leo was nothing. He was part of the trash. They didn't think for a second that the ghost was actually listening to every word of their plan. Leo knew who Jax Miller was. Everyone in this part of town did. The bikers were the only ones who didn't look down on the street kids. Once, a few months back, Jax had been walking into a convenience store and noticed Leo staring at a display of protein bars. Jax hadn't called the cops or told him to beat it. He had bought 2 bars, walked out, and tossed them to Leo with a grunt. "Eat up, kid. The desert eats the weak." That small act of humanity had stayed with Leo. In a world that wanted him gone, a man with a skull on his back had acknowledged he existed. As the men moved toward the edge of the alley, Leo felt a surge of panic. It was 9:50 a.m. The Sinclair station was less than 50 yards away. He saw the black van pull into a spot where it could easily block the exit. He saw the twitchy-eyed man slip a suppressed pistol into his waistband. Then he heard it. The low, rhythmic thrum of a high-compression V-twin engine. It sounded like thunder rolling across the pavement. Jax was coming. The vultures moved into position. Two of them slipped behind the large ice machine at the front of the station. The leader stayed by the van, pretending to check a map. They were professional. They looked like nobody. But Leo saw the malice radiating off them. Jax pulled in. He was riding a custom Harley-Davidson, a blacked-out machine that looked as mean as he did. He killed the engine, and for a moment, the silence was more deafening than the roar had been. He kicked the stand down, his heavy boots clicking on the asphalt. He looked tired. He reached for the gas pump, his mind likely on the club meeting or the long ride ahead. Leo knew if he stayed quiet, Jax would die. If he spoke up, the men in the alley would kill him. He looked at the sandwich crust in his hand. He looked at his bare, bruised feet. Then he looked at the man who had given him food when he was starving. Leo didn't think. He bolted. He ran with everything he had, his small feet hitting the hot pavement. He didn't go for the pump. He circled the back of the station, coming up behind Jax's bike. Jax heard the footsteps. He was a man who lived in a state of constant high alert. His hand moved toward his hip, his eyes narrowing as he saw the small, disheveled figure rushing toward him. "Hey, kid, back off," Jax growled, his voice like gravel in a blender. Leo didn't stop. He dove into the space between Jax and the bike, grabbing the leather of Jax's vest to pull him down. He stood on his tiptoes, his face inches from the biker's ear. "It's a setup, run," Leo whispered, his voice trembling but urgent. "They're behind the ice machine. They have guns. They're going to kill you when you start the pump. Run." Jax froze. Most men would have laughed or brushed the kid off. But Jax saw the pure, unadulterated terror in Leo's eyes. He felt the kid's hands shaking. And then he saw it, the slight glint of sunlight off metal behind the ice machine. In one fluid motion, Jax didn't run. He didn't have time to get the bike started. Instead, he grabbed Leo by the back of his shirt, tucked him under his massive arm like a football, and dove behind the thick steel frame of the gas station's concrete pillars. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of suppressed gunfire hissed through the air. The side mirror of the Harley shattered into 1,000 pieces. A bullet sparked off the metal of the pillar right where Jax's head had been a second before. "Stay down, kid. Don't you move," Jax roared. The vultures realized the element of surprise was gone. They stepped out from behind the ice machine, no longer trying to hide. The twitchy-eyed man was snarling, his suppressed pistol spitting lead. Jax reached into the hidden pocket of his leather vest. He didn't pull out a small handgun. He pulled out a heavy-duty .45, a hand cannon that meant business. "You want a war in the middle of a Sinclair?" Jax yelled over the pillar. "You'd better be ready to die for it." The vultures didn't care about the location. They fired again, pinning Jax down. Leo was curled into a ball at Jax's feet, his hands over his ears, crying silently. He had never been this close to death, and the sound of the bullets hitting the pillar was like the world tearing apart. Jax looked down at the boy. For the first time in 20 years, Jax felt something other than anger or duty. He felt a fierce, protective rage. This kid, this nothing of a kid, had risked his life to warn him. "You're okay, Leo," Jax grunted, using the name he had overheard the deli owner shout at the boy weeks ago. "I got you." Jax leaned out and fired 2 rounds. The boom of the .45 was a symphony compared to the weak hissing of the vulture's guns. One of the men behind the ice machine screamed and fell back, clutching his shoulder. "The van," the leader of the vultures shouted. "Get him now." The black van lurched forward, tires screeching. It wasn't trying to escape. It was driving straight for the pillar, intending to ram Jax and the boy, or at least flush them out into the open. Jax gripped Leo's shoulder. "When I say go, you run back to the alley and hide in the dumpster. Don't look back. You hear me?" "No," Leo sobbed. "They'll kill you." "Nobody kills a Hell's Angel today," Jax said, his eyes turning to cold flint. The van was 20 feet away. Jax stood up, bracing himself against the pillar. He wasn't looking at the van's grill. He was aiming for the driver. He squeezed the trigger 3 times. The windshield of the van spiderwebbed. The driver slumped over the wheel, and the van veered sharply to the left, slamming into a row of propane tanks at the edge of the lot. The explosion wasn't massive, but the hiss of escaping gas and the impact sent a cloud of dust and debris into the air. Go? Now. Jax shoved Leo toward the back of the station. Leo ran. He didn't want to leave, but the look in Jax's eyes told him that the Ironhead was about to live up to his name. As Leo reached the safety of the alley, he looked back. He saw Jax standing in the middle of the gas station lot, both hands on his gun, moving toward the remaining vultures with the steady, terrifying pace of a juggernaut. The vultures were panicked. They hadn't expected the ghost to talk, and they certainly hadn't expected Jax Miller to fight like a man with nothing to lose. They scrambled for the van, dragging their wounded comrade with them. They piled in and sped off, leaving a trail of oil and broken glass behind them. Silence returned to the Sinclair, broken only by the distant sound of sirens. Jax didn't chase them. He turned around, his chest heaving, and looked toward the alley. He saw the small face of the boy peeking out from behind a dumpster. Jax holstered his weapon. He walked over to his bike, seeing the damage. He didn't curse. He just looked at the spot where the boy had stood. He walked toward the alley. Leo didn't run away this time. He stood his ground, his face pale, his body trembling. Jax stopped 5 feet away. He looked at the boy's bare feet, the dirt, and the oversized shirt. He thought about the men with the guns and how easy it would have been for Leo to stay in the shadows. "Why'd you do it, kid?" Jax asked. "You could have been killed." Leo wiped his nose with his sleeve. "You gave me the bars," he whispered. "You saw me." Jax felt a lump in his throat he hadn't felt since he was a boy himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He called the clubhouse. "This is Jax. I need a sweep at the Sinclair on Highway 15. The vultures tried to move. They're in a black van, heading north. Find them, and tell Big G to bring the truck." He hung up and looked back at Leo. "What's your name, kid?" "Leo." "Well, Leo," Jax said, stepping closer and placing a massive, tattooed hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think it's time you got some shoes. And a real meal." But what Jax didn't know was that the vultures weren't done. They hadn't just been sent to kill Jax. They had been sent to start a war that would involve everyone Leo had ever known. And the secret Leo was carrying, the reason he was really in that alley, was about to change the Hells Angels forever. Stay tuned, because what happens next is something no one saw coming. The vultures are regrouping, and they've found Leo's hiding spot. If you want to see how Jax protects his new little brother, type "Protect Leo" in the comments right now. Jax didn't wait for the police to arrive. In the world of the Hells Angels, involving the authorities only complicated things, especially when a rival crew like the Vultures had just tried to turn a gas station into a graveyard. He scanned the perimeter one last time, his eyes lingering on the shattered glass and the leaking oil from the Vultures' getaway van. Then he looked down at Leo. The boy looked smaller than ever now that the adrenaline was fading, his thin frame shaking under the weight of the moment. "Come on," Jax said, his voice softer than before, but still carrying that undeniable edge of command. "We're not staying here. The cops will be crawling over this place in 5 minutes, and I don't plan on being the one answering their questions." He led Leo back to the blacked-out Harley. The bike had taken a hit, the mirror was gone, and there was a deep gouge in the paint on the tank, but the engine was the heart of the beast, and it was still beating. Jax swung his leg over the seat and looked at Leo, who was staring at the machine with a mix of awe and terror. "Climb on," Jax ordered. "Hold on to my vest. Tight. If you fall off, the desert's going to have a new hood ornament, and I don't think you'd look good in chrome." Leo hesitated for only a second before scrambling onto the back. His small hands gripped the thick leather of Jax's vest, his fingers digging into the patches. Jax fired up the engine, the roar echoing off the station's canopy, and they peeled out, leaving the Sinclair in a cloud of dust just as the first faint sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. As they rode, the wind whipped past them, hot and smelling of sagebrush and asphalt. Leo squeezed his eyes shut. He had spent his whole life watching these bikes from the sidewalk, feeling the vibration in his chest as they passed, but he never dreamed he'd be on one. For a moment, the fear of the vultures was replaced by the sheer, terrifying thrill of speed. Jax took the back roads, weaving through the industrial outskirts where the warehouses were tall and the streetlights were few. He was checking his mirrors every 10 seconds, looking for that black van or any vehicle that followed too closely. He wasn't just worried about himself anymore. He had a passenger, a witness, and a target. They pulled up to a nondescript building surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A heavy steel gate stood in their way. A man with a long ponytail and a shotgun stepped out of a small shack, his eyes narrowing until he recognized the man on the bike. "Jax, we heard the chatter on the radio. You okay?" the guard shouted, signaling for the gate to open. "I'm upright," Jax grunted as he rolled through. "Get the word out. Full lockdown. No one comes in or out unless they're wearing a patch or they're with me." He parked the bike in front of a low-slung building that looked like a warehouse, but was actually the heart of the chapter's operations, the clubhouse. As the engine died, the silence felt heavy. A dozen bikers were already outside, some checking weapons, others talking in hushed, urgent tones. They all stopped and stared as Jax hopped off the bike and reached back to help a dirt-covered, barefoot boy slide down to the pavement. "Jax, what the hell is this?" a man asked, stepping forward. He was older, with silver hair and a vest that identified him as Prez. This was Big Silas, the leader of the chapter. "This is the reason I'm still breathing, Silas," Jax said, wiping the sweat and road grime from his forehead. "The vultures had me pinned. This kid, Leo, he saw the setup in the alley. He ran out and warned me right before they opened fire." The yard went silent. The bikers looked at Leo, and for the first time in his life, Leo didn't feel invisible. He felt like he was under a microscope. "The vultures?" Silas's voice was like low thunder. "In our backyard? On a solo hit." "They're getting bold," Jax replied. They had a van, suppressed 9mm, and a driver who didn't mind collateral damage. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were hunting. Silas walked up to Leo. He was a massive man, even bigger than Jax, but his eyes were thoughtful. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy. "You got a lot of heart, Leo. Most grown men would have stayed in the shadows. Why did you help him?" Leo looked at his feet, his voice barely a whisper. "He was nice to me. He gave me food. My mom always said you look out for the people who look out for you." Silas nodded slowly, then looked up at Jax. "The kid's a target now. If the vultures saw him warn you, they'll want him silenced. They can't have a witness running around who can identify their shooters." "I know," Jax said. "That's why he's staying here." "Here? Jax, this is a clubhouse, not an orphanage." One of the younger bikers, a hothead named Rex, spoke up. "We're about to go to war. We don't have time to babysit." Jax turned on Rex, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "He's not a burden, Rex. He's a guest of the sergeant-at-arms. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me on the mat. This kid did more for the club today than you've done all month." Rex backed down, muttering under his breath. Silas stood up and clapped a hand on Jax's shoulder. "He stays. Take him inside. Get him fed, get him cleaned up. We'll talk strategy in an hour." Jax led Leo into the clubhouse. Inside, it smelled of stale beer, cigar smoke, and leather. There was a pool table in the center, a long bar, and walls covered in photos of brothers who had gone before them. It was a man's world, harsh and rugged. But to Leo, it felt like a fortress. A woman with a tough expression and a property of patch on her jacket approached them. This was Maria, one of the club's old ladies who ran the kitchen and kept the place from falling into chaos. "Heard the news," she said, looking Leo over with a critical eye. "Lord, child, you look like you've been dragged through the Mojave backward. Come with me. We'll get you a hot shower and some clothes that actually fit." Leo looked at Jax, unsure. Jax gave him a small nod. "Go on, Leo. Maria's the boss in here. Do what she says." While Leo was being tended to, Jax sat at the heavy oak table in the meeting room. Silas, Jax, and the other officers gathered around. "The vultures are backed by a new cartel out of Mexicali," Silas began, tossing a folder onto the table. "They want the route through the valley. They think we're an old-school relic that can be pushed aside. This hit on Jax was supposed to be the opening bell. We need to strike back, Rex said, slamming his fist on the table. Tonight, we hit their warehouse on 4th Street. Burn it to the ground. No, Jax said firmly. That's what they want. They want us emotional and sloppy. We need to find out who gave them my schedule. They knew I'd be at that Sinclair at 10. I don't go there every day. That was a planned hit based on fresh intel. The room went cold. The implication was clear. There was a rat. You think someone in the club leaked? Silas asked, his voice low and dangerous. Either in the club or someone very close to us, Jax said. I want a full sweep of all phone logs and bank accounts. Nobody's above suspicion, not even the prospects. Outside the meeting room, Leo was sitting in the kitchen. He was wearing a shirt that was still too big but was clean, and a pair of sturdy boots that Maria had found in a storage closet. He was eating a bowl of thick beef stew, the best thing he had ever tasted. But as he ate, his mind went back to the alley. He remembered the men talking. He remembered more than he had told Jax. He had been so scared at the gas station that he had only focused on the setup and the run, but now, in the quiet of the kitchen, the voices came back to him. Make sure the payment hits the usual account, the twitchy-eyed leader had said. Our friend inside says Miller is the only one who can't be bought. Once he's gone, the rest of the angels will fold for the right price. Leo froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. A friend inside. He looked toward the meeting room door. He wanted to tell Jax, but the memory of the guns and the explosion made his throat tighten. Who could he trust? Jax had saved him, but Jax was one man. What if the friend was one of the men sitting at that table right now? Suddenly, the back door of the kitchen creaked open. Leo jumped, nearly knocking over his stew. Rex, the younger biker who had complained about Leo staying, walked in. He looked around to make sure Maria was gone, then leaned over the counter, his face inches from Leo's. Listen to me, you little rat, Rex hissed. I don't care what you told Jax. You're a liability. If I were you, I'd find a way to disappear tonight. The vultures are looking for you, and if they find you here, it brings heat on all of us. You understand? Leo nodded slowly, his heart racing. Good, Rex said, straightening up. Because if the vultures don't get you, I might just decide you're not worth the trouble of protecting. Rex turned and walked out, leaving Leo trembling in the silence. Leo realized then that the clubhouse wasn't the fortress he thought it was. It was a cage, and he was trapped inside with a wolf. He had to get a message to Jax, but he couldn't do it in the clubhouse. He needed to get Jax alone. An hour later, Jax came out of the meeting, looking exhausted. He saw Leo sitting on a stool, his bowl empty. Hey kid, you feeling better? Jax asked, walking over and ruffling Leo's hair. Jax, Leo whispered, his voice cracking. Can we go for a walk? Just outside. I need some air. Jax saw the look in Leo's eyes, the same look he'd seen at the gas station. His sergeant-at-arms instincts kicked in. Yeah, Leo. Let's go. I need a smoke anyway. They walked out into the yard. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the pavement. The other bikers were busy preparing their machines, the sound of clanking tools and revving engines filling the air. Jax led Leo to the far corner of the fence, near the storage sheds, where it was quiet. What is it, Leo? What's wrong? Leo looked around, making sure no one was listening. I heard them in the alley, Jax. Before the gas station. They said they had a friend inside. Someone who was getting paid. Jax's jaw tightened. A friend inside? Did they say a name? No, Leo said, his eyes tearing up. But Rex, he just came into the kitchen. He told me I had to leave. He said I was a liability and that he might not protect me. Jax felt a cold fury rising in his chest. He had suspected Rex. The kid was always complaining about money and lacked the discipline of the older members. But hearing it from Leo made it real. Listen to me, Leo, Jax said, kneeling down. You did the right thing telling me. From now on, you don't talk to anyone but me or Silas. You stay in my sight. If Rex comes near you again, you scream. You hear me. I'm scared, Jax. I know, but you saved my life, and I'm going to save yours. I promise. But before Jax could take action, a loud explosion rocked the front gate. Boom. The sound was followed by a barrage of gunfire. The vultures weren't waiting for the angels to strike. They had brought the war to the clubhouse. Get inside. To the vault. Jax screamed, grabbing Leo and running toward the main building. The yard was a scene of pure chaos. A truck had rammed the gate, and gunmen were pouring out, firing indiscriminately. The Hell's Angels were returning fire, the air filled with the deafening roar of shotguns and pistols. Jax made it to the heavy steel door of the clubhouse, but as he reached for the handle, a bullet caught him in the shoulder. He grunted, stumbling forward, but didn't let go of Leo. He shoved the boy inside. Go to Maria? Run. Leo turned to look back, seeing Jax slumped against the doorframe, his blood staining the iron-head patch on his vest. Outside, through the smoke, Leo saw a figure moving toward them. It wasn't a vulture. It was Rex. Rex wasn't firing at the invaders. He was aiming his gun at Jax. Sorry, Jax, Rex shouted over the noise. The vultures pay better. Leo's heart stopped. Jax was wounded, his gun hand trembling. He didn't see Rex coming from the side. Leo didn't think. He didn't run to the vault. He grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall next to the door. With a strength he didn't know he had, he lunged forward and slammed the heavy metal canister into the back of Rex's knees just as Rex was pulling the trigger. The shot went wild, hitting the ceiling. Rex fell to his granite-hard knees, howling in pain. Jax, sensing the movement, spun around and delivered a brutal elbow to Rex's jaw, knocking the traitor unconscious. I told you. I got you. Jax gasped, clutching his shoulder as Silas and the other bikers arrived to secure the entrance. The battle for the clubhouse was just beginning, but one thing was certain. The ghost of the alleys had just saved the Hell's Angels a second time. But as the vultures breached the inner perimeter, Jax realized this wasn't just a hit. It was a kidnapping attempt. And they weren't after him. They were after Leo. What does the homeless boy have that a cartel and a biker gang would kill to possess? The answer lies in the secret Leo's mother left him. A secret he hasn't even told Jax yet. Tell us what you think the secret is in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're riding with Leo and Jax. The sound of the heavy steel door slamming shut echoed through the clubhouse like a funeral bell. Outside, the roar of the vulture's assault was a muffled thunder, but inside, the air was thick with the smell of cordite and copper. Jax slumped against the wall, his face pale, blood seeping through his fingers as he gripped his shoulder. Beside him, Rex lay face down on the floor, unconscious, the fire extinguisher Leo had used to save Jax's life still rolling slowly across the concrete. Maria, get the kit. Silas roared, stepping over Rex's limp body. The president of the chapter looked like a demon carved from stone, his eyes darting from the reinforced windows to his wounded sergeant-at-arms. Leo was frozen. His hands were still vibrating from the impact of hitting Rex. He looked at Jax, then at the blood on the floor, and for a moment, the world felt like it was spinning out of control. He was just a kid from a dumpster. He wasn't supposed to be in the middle of a war zone. But as Maria rushed over with a medical bag, Jax reached out with his good hand and gripped Leo's wrist. You stay with me, Leo, Jax wheezed, his teeth gritted against the pain. Don't you dare go quiet on me now. I'm here, Jax, Leo whispered, kneeling beside him. Maria worked with the efficiency of a combat medic, cutting away Jax's leather vest, the sacred colors he had worn for 15 years, to get to the wound. It's a clean through and through, Jax. You're lucky. Another inch to the left, and you'd be riding in the great beyond. While Maria patched Jax up, Silas turned his attention to Rex. He grabbed the traitor by the hair and hauled him upright, slapping him awake. Rex groaned, his eyes fluttering open, only to meet the icy stare of the man who had given him his patch. Why, Rex? Silas's voice was dangerously low. We were brothers. Rex spat blood onto Silas's boots, a twisted grin forming on his face. Brothers? You're dinosaurs, Silas. You're sitting on a gold mine of routes and territory, and you're content with selling t-shirts and running security for local bars. The vultures, they're connected. They're modern. They offered me more in 1 week than I'd make in a year with this club. Where are they? Jax barked, pushing Maria aside as he struggled to sit up. Why are they hitting the clubhouse? They know they can't hold this ground. Rex laughed, a harsh, wet sound. They don't want the ground, Jax. And they don't even really want you anymore. They want the kid. Everyone in the room turned to look at Leo. The boy shrank back, his eyes wide. What does a cartel-backed crew want with a homeless kid? Silas asked. Rex looked at Leo, his eyes narrowing. Ask him about his mother. Ask him what she was doing in Mexicali before she disappeared to Vegas. The vultures didn't find him by accident at that Sinclair. They've been hunting that brat for 2 years. Jax looked at Leo, his expression softening, but his eyes searching. Leo? What is he talking about? Leo felt a cold lump form in his stomach. He reached into the collar of his oversized shirt and pulled out a small, grimy leather pouch hanging from a piece of twine. He had never shown it to anyone. To him, it was just a piece of his mom. My mom. She told me to never take this off, Leo said, his voice trembling. She said if anything ever happened to her, I had to keep it secret. She said it was our ticket out of the dirt. He opened the pouch and pulled out a small, silver USB drive and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. Jax took the drive, his hand steadying despite the blood loss. Silas, get the laptop, Jax ordered. As the sounds of gunfire outside began to fade, the Angels' perimeter defense successfully pushing the vultures back into the night. The inner circle of the club gathered around a ruggedized computer in the back office. Jax plugged in the drive. The screen flickered to life, revealing hundreds of files. Spreadsheets, photos of shipping manifests, and scanned documents bearing the official seal of the Mexicali authorities. It's an encrypted ledger, Jax whispered, scrolling through the data. This isn't just a record of drug sales. It's a map of every crooked official, every hidden warehouse, and every laundering front the vultures and their cartel backers have in the Southwest. Silas whistled low. This is a death warrant. No wonder they're tearing the city apart to find him. If this data gets to the feds, the vultures don't just lose their territory, they go to prison for the next 3 lifetimes. Leo looked at the screen, then at the floor. My mom worked in their office. She saw what they were doing. She stole it because she thought she could sell it to the police to get us enough money to move to Florida. But then we had to run, and she got sick. Jax felt a wave of protective fury. This boy had been carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar war in a pouch around his neck while sleeping behind dumpsters. He had been a ghost not just to survive the streets, but to protect the legacy of a mother who had tried to give him a better life. They're coming back, Jax said, looking at Silas. Now that they know he's here, they won't stop until this place is rubble. Then we move, Silas said. We can't fight a war of attrition here. We take the kid to the nest in the mountains. We gather the other chapters. If the vultures want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget. Just then, the clubhouse's internal alarm blared. Front gate is breached again, a voice crackled over the radio. They've got an armored ram. This isn't a hit and run anymore. It's a siege. Jax, take the kid and the drive, Silas commanded, grabbing his shotgun. Use the tunnel in the basement. It comes out in the old drainage canal half a mile away. There's a scout bike stashed there. Get him out of the city. We'll hold them here. I'm not leaving you, Silas, Jax protested. That's an order, Sergeant. Silas roared. The club survives if that drive survives. The boy survives if you do your job. Now move. Jax grabbed Leo's hand. They didn't have time for goodbyes. They ran through the kitchen, past Maria, who was arming herself with a submachine gun, and down a set of narrow stairs into the darkness of the basement. The air was damp and smelled of earth. Jax kicked aside a heavy wooden crate, revealing a rusted iron hatch. He hauled it open and motioned for Leo to go first. It's okay, Leo. Just like the alleys, remember? Stay small, stay quiet. They crawled through the cramped, concrete pipe for what felt like hours, though it was likely only 15 minutes. Above them, they could hear the faint, staccato rhythm of gunfire and the heavy thud of explosions. The Hells Angels were making their stand, turning their home into a fortress of fire and lead. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air of a dry drainage canal. Stashed under a pile of camouflage netting was a stripped-down Sportster, built for speed and stealth. Jax swung his leg over the bike, his injured shoulders screaming in protest. He pulled Leo onto the back. "Hold on, kid. We're going to have to ride like the devil's chasing us." As they roared out of the canal and onto the deserted backroads leading toward the mountains, Leo looked back at the city. A plume of black smoke was rising from the direction of the clubhouse. "Will they be okay, Jax?" Leo shouted over the wind. "They're angels, Leo," Jax said, his voice thick with emotion. "They don't go down easy." They rode through the night, the desert a blur of silver and shadow. Jax knew they weren't safe yet. The vultures had eyes everywhere, and Rex wasn't the only person who could be bought. He kept the bike at a steady 90, his eyes scanning the horizon for the telltale glow of headlights. By the time the sun began to peek over the edge of the world, they were deep in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and cold stone. Jax pulled off the main road and onto a hidden trail that wound upward through a series of jagged switchbacks. At the top of the ridge sat a small, fortified cabin, the Nest. It was a place only the high-ranking officers knew about, equipped with its own power, water, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Jax killed the engine and helped Leo off the bike. Both of them were covered in dust, exhausted, and battered. Jax stumbled, his wound finally taking its toll. Leo caught him, propping the massive man up as best he could. "We made it, Jax. We're safe." Jax looked at the boy, then at the cabin. He knew better. "We're not safe until the vultures are extinct, Leo. But for now, we have the high ground." Inside the cabin, Jax went straight to the shortwave radio. He began broadcasting on a secure, encrypted frequency. "This is Ironhead. The Nest is active. I have the package. I need the Council of Seven. Code Red. I repeat, Code Red." He sat back, clutching his shoulder. Leo was standing by the window, looking out at the vast expanse of the valley below. "Jax." "Yeah, kid. Why did you come back for me? In the basement? You could have just taken the drive and gone faster." Jax looked at the boy who had nothing, yet had given everything to save a man he barely knew. He saw the same loneliness in Leo's eyes that he had felt when he was 19, wandering the streets before the club became his family. "Because the drive is just data, Leo," Jax said softly. "But you're a brother, and we never leave a brother behind." Leo smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes for the first time. But the moment was broken by the sound of a distant engine. Not a motorcycle, a helicopter. Jax grabbed his binoculars and ran to the porch. Far below, a black chopper was rising from the valley floor, banking toward the ridge. It didn't have any markings, but Jax knew exactly who it was. They tracked the bike's GPS, Jax hissed, cursing himself for not thinking of it in the heat of the escape. "They're not even trying to hide anymore. They're coming for the drive, and they're bringing the heavy air support." He looked at Leo, then at the single .45 he had left. "Leo, get in the cellar. There's a steel plate under the rug. Lock it from the inside." "No, Jax. I'm not leaving you. You listen to me." Jax grabbed him by the shoulders, his eyes fierce. "You're the only one who can explain that ledger to the feds. If I don't make it, you wait until the noise stops. Then you take the bike and head north. Find a man named Old Man Pete in Reno. He'll know what to do." The helicopter was closing in, the thrum of its rotors shaking the cabin. "Go? Now." Leo scrambled into the cellar just as the first rounds of a mounted machine gun began to tear through the roof of the cabin. Jax stood on the porch, his silhouette framed by the rising sun, his gun raised against the sky. He was one man against a helicopter, a sergeant-at-arms defending the only thing that mattered. But as the cabin began to splinter around him, Jax saw something that changed everything. On the horizon, a line of light was reflecting off chrome. 1 bike. 10 bikes. 50 bikes. The Hells Angels hadn't stayed behind to die. They had followed him. They had called every chapter from 3 states. The roar of 50 engines drowned out the sound of the helicopter. "You hear that, Leo?" Jax yelled over the carnage, a bloody grin on his face. "That's the sound of the cavalry." The battle for the ridge was about to begin, and the world was about to learn that when you mess with a homeless boy, you mess with the entire Brotherhood of the Patch. The roar of the engines wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force that made the mountain itself seem to vibrate. Jax stood his ground on the splintering porch of the nest, his eyes fixed on the black helicopter that was currently banking for another strafing run. The Vulture's pilot saw the incoming wall of chrome and leather, a literal sea of Hell's Angels surging up the winding trail, and hesitated. That split second of indecision was all Jax needed. He ducked back into the cabin, the wood chips flying as machine gun fire shredded the doorframe behind him. Down in the cellar, Leo pressed his back against the cold stone wall. The thudding of the rotors was so loud it felt like it was inside his skull. He held the leather pouch tight against his chest. He thought about his mom, about how she had spent her final days looking over her shoulder, terrified that the men in the black van would find them. She had died in the shadows, but Leo realized he was done hiding. He looked at the steel plate above him, then at the small, narrow ventilation shaft that led to the crawl space under the porch. "I'm not just a package," Leo whispered to himself. On the ridge, the first wave of bikers crested the hill. Leading them wasn't Silas. He was back at the clubhouse, likely finishing the cleanup, but a man known as the General, the president of the Oakland Charter, and a man who hadn't seen a fight he didn't like in 40 years. The bikers didn't just ride. They deployed. Half of them peeled off to form a defensive perimeter around the cabin, while the other half reached into their saddlebags. They weren't just carrying extra fuel. They pulled out shoulder-mounted flare launchers and high-powered rifles. Jax crawled to the window, his wounded shoulder screaming in agony. He saw the general give the signal. A dozen flares shot into the sky, blinding the helicopter pilot's night vision sensors. The chopper veered wildly, its machine gun fire spraying harmlessly into the pine trees. "That's it, brothers," Jax roared, though no one could hear him over the din. Suddenly, the cellar door creaked open. Jax spun around, his .45 leveled, but he lowered it when he saw Leo's dirt-streaked face. "I told you to stay down there." "The ventilation shaft," Leo panted, pointing toward the floor. "I saw them, Jax. There's a second team. They didn't come by air. They climbed the back cliff. They're right under the porch." Jax's blood went cold. The Vultures had used the helicopter as a distraction. While the Hell's Angels were focused on the sky and the trail, a specialized climbing team had ascended the impossible vertical face behind the cabin. Before Jax could react, the floorboards beneath him exploded upward. Two men in tactical gear, wearing the Vulture's gray and black colors, burst into the room. One carried a stun baton, the other a suppressed submachine gun. Jax fired, his bullet catching the first man in the chest, but the second man was faster. He lunged at Jax, slamming him into the kitchen table. The wound in Jax's shoulder hit the edge of the wood, and he let out a guttural scream as the world went gray. "The kid! Grab the kid!" the Vulture yelled. Leo didn't wait. He scrambled toward the back door, but the Vulture reached out and grabbed his ankle. Leo fell hard, his chin hitting the floor. The man hauled him back, his hand reaching for the leather pouch around Leo's neck. "Give it here, you little brat, and maybe we'll let you live." Leo didn't give it to him. He remembered what Maria had said about the fire extinguisher. He reached out, his fingers brushing against a heavy cast-iron skillet that had fallen off the wall during the strafing run. He grabbed the handle and swung with every ounce of fear and rage in his body. Clang! The sound was like a church bell. The skillet caught the Vulture square in the temple. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped over, unconscious. Jax, shaking off the white-hot pain, managed to get his good arm around the other Vulture's neck, dragging him down and finishing the fight with a brutal, short-range strike. He gasped for air, looking at Leo, who was still holding the skillet like a shield. Nice swing, kid," Jax wheezed. But there was no time for praise. The cabin was being torn apart. Outside, the helicopter had recovered and was dropping thermal grenades. One landed on the porch, and the dry wood ignited instantly. The nest was becoming a furnace. "We have to go now." Jax grabbed Leo, and they bolted through the back door, the only exit not currently engulfed in flames. They emerged onto the narrow rocky ledge behind the cabin. To their left was the sheer drop the Vultures had climbed. To their right was a narrow goat path that led further up into the jagged peaks. Below them, the battle was absolute. The Hells Angels had engaged the Vulture's ground support in a brutal melee. The sound of chains, bats, and gunfire echoed off the canyon walls. Up the path, Jax directed, pushing Leo ahead of him. As they climbed, the air grew thinner and colder. Jax was losing blood again, his steps becoming heavy and erratic. He knew he couldn't keep this up. He looked down and saw a black SUV speeding up a side trail, cutting off the goat path's exit. The leader of the Vultures stepped out of the vehicle. It was the twitchy-eyed man from the alley, Vincent's brother, a man named Merrick. He looked up the ridge and saw Jax and Leo silhouetted against the dawn. "Miller," Merrick shouted, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "The boy dies, or the drive is mine. There's no third option." Jax leaned against a boulder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Leo. The boy was shivering, his small face pale in the morning light. "Leo," Jax whispered, "give me the pouch." Leo looked at him, confused. "But Jax, you said." "Give it to me. Trust me." Leo handed it over. Jax took the USB drive out and tucked it into his boot. Then, he stuffed the leather pouch with a handful of heavy gravel and a piece of scrap metal from his pocket. He tied it shut. "Listen to me, Leo. When I start talking to him, you slide down that crevice behind the rock. It leads to a small cave. You stay there. Don't move until you hear the general's voice. Understand?" "Jax, no. He'll kill you. He wants the drive, Leo. As long as he thinks I have it, he won't shoot. Now go." "That's an order from your sergeant." Leo hesitated, tears stinging his eyes, but he saw the resolve in Jax's face. He slipped into the shadows of the crevice just as Merrick and two more gunmen began the final climb toward the ledge. Jax stood up, tall and imposing despite his injuries. He held the weighted leather pouch over the edge of the cliff. "Merrick," Jax yelled, "you want the ledger? Here it is. But if you take one more step, I'm dropping it into the abyss. You'll never find it, and your cartel bosses will have your head for breakfast." Merrick stopped. His eyes were locked on the pouch. "You're bluffing, Ironhead. You wouldn't throw away the kid's only protection." "The kid is gone, Merrick. I sent him down the back face 10 minutes ago. He's halfway to the highway by now. All you've got is me and this drive. You want to gamble?" Marek's face twisted in fury. He signaled his men to lower their weapons. "Fine. Put it on the ground and step back. We'll take you as a prisoner. Maybe we'll use you to lure the boy back." "I don't think so," Jax said, a bloody smile spreading across his face. Just then, the sound of a high-performance engine screamed from above. A lone biker, the general himself, had ridden his custom chopper up a nearly vertical incline on the other side of the ridge. He launched the bike off a rocky outcrop, clearing a 10-foot gap and landing squarely between Jax and Merrick. The general didn't even stop the bike. He slid it sideways, kicking up a wall of dirt and gravel that blinded Marek's gunmen. "Need a lift, Jax?" the general growled. "Get the kid." Jax pointed to the crevice. The general reached down, hauling Leo out of the shadows with one hand and throwing him onto the back of the bike. Jax scrambled onto the sidecar, a rugged attachment the general used for hauling gear, now serving as a makeshift ambulance. "Hold on." The general pinned the throttle. The bike roared down the goat path, bouncing over rocks and debris. Merrick screamed in rage, ordering his men to fire, but the Hells Angels sharpshooters from the perimeter had finally found their marks. Two of Marek's men went down, and Merrick was forced to dive for cover behind his SUV. They sped down the mountain, passing the burning remains of the nest. The helicopter was a smoking wreck in the valley. The Angels had managed to bring it down with a lucky shot to the tail rotor. As they reached the main assembly point at the base of the trail, Silas was there, his face covered in soot but grinning like a madman. "We held the line, Jax. The Vultures are scattered. We got him on the run." Jax hopped off the bike, or rather, he fell off, his body finally giving out. The general and Silas caught him. "The drive? It's in my boot," Jax whispered. "Get it to the feds. And Leo, take care of Leo." "We're all taking care of Leo, brother," Silas said, looking at the boy who was standing over Jax, his hand on the biker's forehead. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Ridge, the Hells Angels didn't just disappear. They stayed. They turned the mountain into a fortress of security while the data from the USB drive began to ripple through the legal system. Within 48 hours, the FBI had launched raids in 4 states. The vultures weren't just defeated, they were being dismantled from the top down. But the most shocking thing wasn't the raids or the gunfire. It was what happened 3 days later in the hospital room where Jax was recovering. The general, Silas, and Leo were all there when a man in a sharp suit walked in. He wasn't a biker, and he wasn't a vulture. He was a lawyer from a prestigious firm in San Francisco. "I'm looking for Leo," the man said. Jack sat up, his hand immediately reaching for the call button to summon his brothers outside the door. "Who are you?" "I'm the executor of the estate of Elena Vance," the lawyer said, referring to Leo's mother. "She set up a trust 3 years ago, just before she went into hiding. It wasn't just data she stole from the vultures. She had been skimming small amounts of their laundered money for years. Money they can't claim because it doesn't officially exist." He handed a document to Leo. "Leo, your mother didn't just leave you a drive. She left you nearly $4 million in a blind trust, accessible only when you reached 18. Or, if an emergency occurred, under the guardianship of a person you designate." Leo looked at the paper, then at Jax. He didn't understand the numbers, but he understood the word guardianship. "I don't want the money," Leo said, his voice firm. "I just want a home." Jax looked at Silas, then at the general. The bikers, the men the world feared, were silent. "Well, Leo," Jax said, his voice thick, "you've got a lot of uncles who are pretty good at building things. And I think that diner Diana runs in Bakersfield. She mentioned she wanted to expand. Maybe she needs a partner. And a son." Leo's eyes lit up. He looked at the patch on Jax's vest, the one he had bled on to protect him. "Can I still visit you, Jax?" Jax smiled. "Kid, you're the only person who's ever knocked out a vulture with a frying pan and saved the sergeant-at-arms twice in 1 week. You're not just a visitor. You're family." But as the lawyer left and the brothers celebrated, Jax noticed something in the folder the lawyer had left behind. A photograph of Leo's mother with a man whose face was familiar, a man who wasn't a vulture, but someone high up in the local government. The war wasn't over. It had just moved from the streets to the halls of power. And Leo was the key to it all. The shadows are shifting, and the next chapter is going to be the most dangerous one yet. If you're ready to see how the Hells Angels take on the white-collar monsters, type, "Let's go Hell Angels" now. The hospital room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic hum of the heart monitor and the distant sound of motorcycles idling in the parking lot below. Jax stared at the photograph tucked into the back of the legal folder. In the grainy image, Leo's mother, Elena, was standing next to a man with a sharp, calculated smile, a man Jax recognized from every local news broadcast and political billboard in the county. It was District Attorney Marcus Thorne. Jax felt a familiar, cold weight settle in his gut. This wasn't just about a biker war or a ledger of drug sales. Elena hadn't just been a secretary for the vultures. She had been the bridge between the criminal underworld and the very people sworn to uphold the law. "Silas," Jax said, his voice a low rasp. The president stepped away from the window, his massive frame casting a shadow over the bed. "I see it, Jax. I know that face. If Thorne was with her, and she had that drive." Jax trailed off, looking at Leo, who was sitting in a plastic chair by the door, trying to make sense of the legal jargon on the papers in his lap. It means the vultures weren't just trying to get their money back. They were trying to protect the DA. Thorne isn't just a crooked politician. He's the architect. Leo looked up, his eyes wide. "That man, the one in the picture. He came to our apartment once. In the middle of the night. He and my mom were arguing. He told her she was a fool for thinking she could ever leave." Jax gripped the edge of his hospital bed so hard his knuckles turned white. They friend inside. The vultures had mentioned in the alley wasn't just a rogue biker like Rex. It was the man at the top of the judicial food chain. Thorne could make evidence disappear. He could sign off on warrants for rival gangs. And he could ensure that the police always arrived 5 minutes too late to the Sinclair gas station. "We can't go to the feds yet," Jax whispered. If Thorne has his hooks in the local office, the drive will be lost before the first file is opened. We need to go around him. We need to go public. You know what that means, Jax? Silas warned. If we go to the press, we're putting a spotlight on the club, too. The feds won't just look at Thorne. They'll look at us. Let him look, Jax said, his eyes turning to flint. We've got nothing to hide but our scars. But that kid? He deserves a world where the monsters aren't running the courthouse. The plan was set in motion that night. The Hells Angels didn't ride out with guns this time. They rode out with information. Jax, despite his doctor's protests, checked himself out of the hospital 48 hours early. He couldn't protect Leo from a hospital bed. They moved back to the diner in Bakersfield, the one owned by Diana, the woman whose son Ethan had once saved a biker's life. Diana's diner had become a sanctuary. It was neutral ground, a place where the community saw the bikers not as a menace, but as the only line of defense against the corruption rotting their city. He stays in the back room with Ethan, Diana said, her voice firm as she greeted Jax and the brothers at the door. My boys are safe here. I've got the local truckers watching the perimeter. Nobody gets in unless I say so. Jax nodded, leaning heavily on a cane. Thanks, Diana. We just need 24 hours to get the press kit together. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was tense. The general had sent 3 of his best tech-savvy prospects to help Jax and Silas filter the data on the drive. They found what they were looking for in a hidden subfolder labeled the Thorne account. It was a list of bribes, kickbacks, and even the coordinates for a private airstrip where the vultures landed their shipments, all signed off by the DA's office under the guise of undercover stings. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, the sound of a heavy vehicle pulling into the gravel lot made everyone freeze. It wasn't a motorcycle. It wasn't a black van. It was a fleet of official black SUVs with flashing blue and red lights. Police, a voice boomed through a megaphone. We have a warrant for the arrest of Jax Miller and the recovery of a minor, Leo Vance. Vacate the premises immediately. Jax looked through the window. It wasn't the regular patrol. It was the sheriff's tactical unit, and leading them was Marcus Thorne himself, standing in the middle of the street in a tailored coat, looking like a savior. He's moving early, Silas hissed, drawing his sidearm. He's using the badge to finish the job. If we fight the cops, we lose the public, Jax said, his mind racing. That's exactly what he wants. He wants a shootout with bikers to justify everything he's done. Leo came out of the back room, Ethan right behind him. Jax, are the bad men here? Jax knelt down, looking Leo in the eye. Leo, remember what I said about being a ghost? I need you and Ethan to do that one more time. There's a cold storage locker in the back that leads to the alley. Diana, take the boys. Go to the church on the 5th. The father there, he's an old friend of the club. He'll keep you in the sanctuary. What about you? Leo asked, his voice trembling. I'm going to go talk to the man in the picture, Jax said. I'm going to show him that he picked the wrong club to mess with. Diana grabbed the boys and disappeared into the kitchen. Jax turned to Silas and the others. Empty the clips. We aren't shooting tonight. We're recording. He handed a smartphone to a prospect. Livestream everything. Every word. Every movement. If they kill us, the world sees it in real time. Jax straightened his vest, ignored the searing pain in his shoulder, and walked out the front door of the diner. He stood on the porch, his hands empty and raised. The tactical team leveled their rifles at him. Thorne stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. Jax Miller, you're charged with kidnapping, felony evasion, and possession of stolen property. Where's the boy? The boy is safe, Thorne, Jax said, his voice carrying through the quiet street. Safe from the man who helped his mother's killers. Safe from the man whose name is all over the USB drive currently being uploaded to the state's 3 largest newspapers. Thorne's smile faltered. You're bluffing. You're a low-life biker. Nobody believes a word you say. Maybe not, Jax agreed. But they'll believe the bank transfer numbers. They'll believe the photos of you at the Vultures Clubhouse. And right now, about 50,000 people are watching you on the internet. He pointed to the prospect in the window, who was holding the phone steady. Thorne looked at the phone, then at his men. For a second, Jack saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in the DA's eyes. This wasn't a world Thorne knew how to navigate. He was a creature of backrooms and shadows, not the blinding light of a viral video. Kill the feed. Thorne screamed at his officers. Confiscate those devices. They're evidence. The tactical team hesitated. They were cops, not cartel hitmen. They saw the phone. They saw Jack standing there, unarmed and bleeding. They heard the conviction in his voice. Sir, one of the officers asked, we don't have a warrant for electronics. I am the district attorney. I am the warrant. Thorne roared, losing his composure. He reached out and snatched a sidearm from the officer's holster, pointing it directly at Jax's chest. I'll end this myself. Crack. The shot didn't come from Thorne's gun. A single round from a long-range rifle struck the pavement at Thorne's feet, sending up a spray of asphalt. High on the roof of the hardware store across the street, the general stood up, his silhouette visible against the moon. He wasn't alone. On every rooftop surrounding the diner, the chrome of motorcycles and the glint of scopes appeared. The Hells Angels hadn't stayed inside. They had taken the high ground. Drop it, Thorne. The general's voice echoed through the street. The state police are 3 minutes out. We called M 20 minutes ago. We told M there was a rogue official threatening civilians. I don't think they're going to be on your side. Thorne looked around, his world crumbling. The sirens in the distance were different now, the deep, multi-toned wail of state troopers and federal marshals. Jax took a step forward, closing the distance until the barrel of Thorne's stolen gun was pressing against his iron-head patch. Go ahead, Marcus, Jax whispered. Make my day. Let the world see you kill a cameraman. It'll make the trial much shorter. Thorne's hand shook. He looked at the camera, then at the approaching lights of the state police. He realized he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Slowly, his fingers loosened. The gun clattered to the pavement. Jax didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He simply watched as the state troopers swarmed the lot, bypassing the bikers and moving straight for the district attorney. Marcus Thorne, a federal agent said, stepping out of the lead car. You're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and a dozen other things we're going to find on that drive. As they led Thorne away in handcuffs, the DA looked back at Jax. You think you won? You're still just a biker. You'll be back in the dirt in a week. Maybe, Jax said. But the kid won't be. An hour later, the diner was a scene of quiet relief. The police had taken their statements and left, realizing that the Hells Angels had done the job they were too compromised to do. Jax sat at a booth, his head in his hands, finally letting the exhaustion take over. Leo and Ethan came running back from the church, bursting through the doors and throwing their arms around Jax. We saw it on TV, Leo shouted. The bad man is gone. Jax pulled the boy close. He's gone, Leo. For good. Leo looked at the diner, at the brothers standing around, at Diana pouring coffee for the exhausted bikers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small leather pouch, now empty of the drive, but still smelling like his mother's perfume. What happens now, Jax? Do I go to the big house with the money? Jax looked at Silas, then at Diana. Well, Jax said, the lawyer says the money is yours. But $4 million is a lot of weight for a 10-year-old. I think we need to invest it. Diana, you were saying the roof needs fixing, right? And Ethan needs a college fund. Diana smiled, tears in her eyes. I think we can find a way to make it work. And as for you, Leo, Jax said, I've got a spare room at my place. It's not a palace, and it smells like motor oil, but it's got a lock on the door and a bed that doesn't leak. And every Saturday, we come here for breakfast. Leo's face lit up. Can I learn how to fix the bikes? Kid, Jax laughed. By the time you're 16, you'll be the best mechanic in the state. I'll make sure of it. But just as the celebration began to peak, a small, unmarked envelope was found tucked under the wiper of Jax's bike outside. Jax opened it. Inside was a single gold coin, a token used by the highest levels of the cartel back in Mexicali. And on a small slip of paper, 3 words were written in elegant script. We remember everything. Jax looked toward the dark horizon. He knew the war with the vultures was over, but the shadow of the cartel was long. He looked at Leo, who was laughing with Ethan, and he knew that his job as sergeant-at-arms had just become a lifetime appointment. He didn't feel afraid. He felt ready, because he wasn't just a man on a bike anymore. He was a father, and a Hell's Angel never lets anyone touch his family. How would you feel if you found out the very people supposed to protect you were the ones putting you in danger? It's a sobering thought, but it shows why loyalty to your brothers is the only thing that lasts. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Jax's choice to go public. The final piece of the puzzle is about to fall into place. If you're ready for the grand finale, where the cartel finally shows its face, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. The gold coin sat heavy in Jax's palm, a cold piece of metal that felt like a curse. The elegant script on the note, "We remember everything," was a message from the deep, from the cartel bosses in Mexicali who didn't care about a local district attorney or a biker war. To them, Thorn and the Vultures had been tools, and tools were replaceable. But the ledger Leo had carried, the map to their entire empire, that was an unforgivable sin. Jax looked at the coin, then at the diner. Inside, the lights were warm, and the sound of laughter was finally returning. He saw Leo sitting at the counter, a glass of chocolate milk in his hands, listening to Silas tell an exaggerated story about a cross-country ride in a snowstorm. Jax knew he couldn't bring this new darkness into that room. Not tonight. He slipped the coin and the note into his pocket and walked back inside, leaning on his cane but keeping his back straight. He caught Silas's eye, a subtle nod that said we need to talk, but not now. The next few months were a blur of transformation. With the trust fund Elena had left behind, the diner underwent a massive renovation. It wasn't just about fixing the roof or painting the walls. It was about building a stronghold. The Bakersfield stop became a hub for the community. The local truckers, the ones who had seen Diana struggle for years, now made it their mandatory break. The bikers from every friendly chapter across the West Coast stopped by, not just for the coffee, but to see the kid who had taken down a DA. Leo flourished. He was no longer the ghost of the alleys. He had grown 2 inches, his face had filled out, and he was always covered in a light dusting of grease from helping Jax in the garage. Jax had moved into a small house just a few miles from the diner, and Leo had the bedroom at the end of the hall. It was filled with model motorcycles, school books, and a framed photo of his mother. But Jax never stopped watching the horizon. He had the clubhouse reinforced with state-of-the-art security. He spent his nights checking the perimeter, his .45 never more than an arm's reach away. He knew the cartel's silence wasn't peace, it was preparation. One Tuesday evening, as the sun was dipping below the valley floor, a silver Mercedes pulled into the diner's lot. It didn't belong to a biker or a trucker. A man in a tailored gray suit stepped out. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like an executive. Jax was sitting on the porch of the diner, cleaning his sunglasses. He stood up as the man approached. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Miller," the man said. His voice was smooth, with a faint Spanish accent. "I'm not hiding," Jax replied. "What do you want?" "My name is Julian. I represent certain interests that were inconvenienced by the recent legal troubles of Mr. Thorne. I'm here to offer a resolution." Jax leaned against the porch railing. "A resolution?" "The last resolution I got was a gold coin on my bike." Julian smiled thinly. "The coin was a reminder of the past. I am here to talk about the future. The data on that drive has caused a great deal of damage. However, we believe there is a second drive, a master key that Elena Vance mentioned in her private journals. We want it." Jax's heart skipped a beat. "A second drive?" He looked toward the kitchen, where Leo was helping Diana. He had never heard of a second drive. "There is no second drive," Jax said firmly. "Everything we had went to the feds." "We don't believe you," Julian said softly. "And more importantly, the people I work for don't believe you. We are prepared to offer you $5 million for that key. No questions asked. You take the boy, you move to Europe, you live like kings. If you refuse..." He paused, looking at the diner. "Well, this is a very flammable building, isn't it?" Jax took a step forward, his shadow towering over the smaller man. "You listen to me, Julian. You tell your bosses that if they ever come near this place, or that boy, again, I won't go to the feds. I'll come to Mexicali myself. And I won't be coming to talk." Julian nodded, unruffled. I thought you might say that. It's a pity. Loyalty is a beautiful thing, Jax, but it makes for a very heavy anchor. Julian turned and walked back to his Mercedes. As he drove away, Jax felt the air grow cold. He knew the final move was coming. He gathered Silas, the general, and the inner circle in the back room of the diner. They think there's more data, Jax explained, throwing the gold coin onto the table. They think Leo's mom hid a master key. They're going to hit us with everything they've got to get it. Is there one? Silas asked, looking at Leo through the window. I don't know, Jax said. But it doesn't matter. They won't believe us if we say no. We have to finish this. We can't keep living on the edge of a blade. What's the move, Jax? The general asked. We lure them in, Jax said. They want the key? We'll give them a meeting. But we do it on our terms. At the old quarry. No cops, no cameras. Just us and them. The meeting was set for midnight on Friday. The quarry was a jagged scar in the earth 10 miles outside of town, a place of steep drops and echoes. Jax arrived alone on his Harley, the leather pouch hanging from his handlebars. A line of black SUVs was waiting. Julian stood in the center, flanked by a dozen men armed with high-end tactical rifles. These weren't vultures. They were professional assassins, the cartel's elite. Do you have it? Julian asked as Jax killed his engine. Jax held up a small, silver USB drive. It was a decoy, filled with nothing but junk data. I want your word. No more threats. No more reminders. You take this, and you vanish from our lives. You have my word, Julian said, reaching for the drive. Wait, Jax said. I want to see the payment. Not the money. The insurance. I know you have a list of our families. I want the physical files you keep on the club's children. Burn them here, now, or this drive goes into the rock crusher. Julian signaled to one of his men, who brought forward a metal briefcase. Inside were folders, detailed dossiers on the Hells Angels families. Julian tossed a match into the case, and the papers began to curl and blacken. Now, the drive, Julian demanded. Jax tossed the drive to him. Julian caught it, but as he looked at it, his eyes narrowed. This feels light, Jax. Data doesn't have weight, Julian, Jax said. Suddenly, a red laser appeared on Julian's chest, then another on the men beside him. You think I came here alone? Jax asked, his voice a low growl. From the rim of the quarry, the roar of 50 engines erupted simultaneously. The Hells Angels hadn't just brought bikes. They had brought the entire California coalition. High above, on the crane overlooking the pit, the general sat with a Barrett .50 cal. You were right about one thing, Julian, Jax said, stepping back toward his bike. Loyalty is an anchor, but it's also a shield. Julian looked up at the rim of the quarry, realizing he was trapped in a kill box. You're starting a war you can't win, Miller. The cartel never stops. Then neither do we, Jax roared. The general fired a warning shot into the engine block of the lead SUV, the boom echoing like a cannon. This is how it's going to work, Jax said over the noise. You take your burned files and your fake drive, and you go back to Mexicali. You tell them that the Hells Angels are the law in this valley. If a single one of your men crosses the border with our names in their mouths, we'll burn your operations from San Diego to the Yucatan. We have the data, Julian. We've already sent a copy to an offshore server. It's set to release to the international press if anything happens to Leo Vance or any member of this club. It was a bluff, the ultimate gamble, but Jax delivered it with the cold certainty of a man who had already faced death and won. Julian stared at Jax for a long, tense minute. He looked at the snipers on the rim, the wall of bikers at the entrance, and the burning files in the briefcase. He realized that the cost of the master key had just become too high. The cartel was a business, and Jax Miller had just made the profit margin disappear. You're a dangerous man, Jax Miller, Julian said, his voice tight. I'm a father, Jax replied. That's much worse. Julian and his men retreated into their SUVs and sped out of the quarry, leaving a trail of dust and the smell of burnt paper. The Hells Angels stayed on the rim until the last taillight vanished. Jax sat on his bike, his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded. Silas rode down into the pit, pulling up beside him. You think they bought it? They bought it for now, Jax said. The dead man's switch on the server, that'll keep them back. They can't risk the whole empire for one kid. And the second drive? Silas asked. Jax reached into his pocket and pulled out the small leather pouch Leo had given him. He felt something hard in the lining. He ripped it open. Tucked inside the leather itself was a tiny microSD card. Elena hadn't put it in the pouch. She had made it the pouch. Jax looked at the card, then at the burning remains of the cartel's files. He didn't plug it in. He didn't look at what was on it. He dropped it into the fire. There is no second drive, Jax said. Not anymore. 1 year later, the diner in Bakersfield was the heart of a festival. It was Leo's 11th birthday. The parking lot was packed with bikes, but also with minivans and sedans. The community was there in full force. Diana had set up a long table outside, piled high with burgers and birthday cake. Leo was in the center of it all, wearing a brand new leather jacket Jax had bought him. It didn't have a Hell's Angel patch. He was still a kid, after all, but on the front, in gold thread, it said Leo. Jax stood by the grill, flipping burgers with Silas. He looked older, his hair a bit grayer, but the exhaustion in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, quiet peace. Ethan ran up to Leo, handing him a wrapped box. Happy birthday, man. Open it. Leo tore into the paper. It was a high-end toolkit. Thanks, Ethan. Now we can finish the engine on the Sportster. Jax watched them, a small smile playing on his lips. He thought about the day at the Sinclair gas station, the boy whispering in his ear, and the setup that had changed his life. He realized that Leo hadn't just saved him from a bullet. He had saved him from a life that was only about the next ride and the next fight. He's a good kid, Silas said, leaning against the grill. The best, Jax agreed. You think he'll ever want the patch, Jax? Jax looked at Leo, who was laughing as he tried to blow out the candles on a cake shaped like a motorcycle. I don't know, but whatever he wants to be, a mechanic, a lawyer, a biker, he's got 1,000 brothers to make sure he gets there. As the sun began to set over the valley, casting a golden light over the diner and the Brotherhood gathered there, Jax felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Leo. Jax, can we go for a ride? Just to the edge of the hills. Jax looked at the boy, then at the horizon. The road was open, the air was clear, and for the first time in his life, the path ahead was bright. Yeah, Leo, Jax said, handing him a helmet. Let's go. They walked to the blacked-out Harley. Jax fired up the engine, the thunder that Leo once feared, but now loved. Leo climbed on the back, his small hands gripping Jax's vest, his fingers resting right over the ironhead patch. They rode out of the lot, the sound of the engine echoing off the hills. Behind them, the lights of the diner glowed like a beacon, a home built on a whisper, a sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond of a family that wasn't born, but made. Leo leaned his head against Jax's back, watching the world fly by. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was Leo, and as the wind whipped past them, he knew that no matter where the road took them, he would never have to run again. Sometimes the most shocking thing isn't the violence or the secrets, but the power of a single moment of courage to heal a broken world. We're so glad you rode with Jax and Leo until the end. If this journey moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our Brotherhood. We have many more stories to tell, and we want you there for every mile. Tell us in the comments, what was your favorite part of Leo's journey?